Welcome back to another masterclass video. Today we find ourselves back in this really interesting forest. I have my snake hook in hand just in case, and I have a snake bag in my pocket. Never know what you're going to find out here. Apple and I were out here just the other day on the ATV. We had to go like 2 or 3 miles on the highway, which is not really legal, but that ATV is actually really fast and we were keeping up with the cars, but we just stayed to the side and got our butts out here. It's a lot of fun, lots of ATV trails, and that ATV goes where there are no trails, so we got pretty deep in here and it was very, very interesting. Anyway, today we are going to discuss Boiga Melanota, the western mangrove snake, one of the biggest Boiga in the genus if you take into consideration overall mass and length. It's a very big snake and very beautiful. So let's get into it. So Melanota occur in southern Myanmar, southern Thailand, which basically run parallel to one another, then down into Malaysia, Singapore, and Sumatra in Indonesia. Now the mangrove snakes that come from Indonesia are basically Dendrophila. However, the Melanota only range into a small portion of Indonesia. Now Melanota used to be a subspecies, so it used to be known as Boiga Dendrophila melanota, but in 2020 they were given their own species status and they became Boiga Melanota. So these mangrove snakes are very much arboreal. During the day, you will find them sleeping up in the treetops. During the nighttime, because they're nocturnal, you may come across them down on the ground foraging for food, but always around water, freshwater, saltwater, brackish water, doesn't matter. Seems like we're always finding these around water of some sort. So if these snakes feel threatened in any way, they have no problems launching themselves into the water, where they will just basically swim off to avoid any danger. Now they also have a very, very impressive threat display where they will gape with an open mouth, and it's basically to threaten predators away, and it is pretty imposing. They will bite if you continue messing with them, but they are also quite happy to just turn and disappear. I have been bit by a number of different Boiga species, but I did receive a bite one time from a large adult mangrove, and it was actually pretty painful. I think it was probably more so because of the size of the animal. It bit me across the top of my fingers, and the rear fang actually went into the skin above one of my knuckles. I don't know how deep that tooth went in, but it did cause localized pain and almost like an arthritic, achy feeling for about a little over a week or so. So that was not fun. So I would always recommend, number one, try not to get bit. Number two, if you do get bit, don't let that animal chew on you. The bite that I'm describing was not a chew. I disconnected it right away. But I think just because of how it all went down and the mechanics of it, it just was not pleasant. Now, due to the fact that they are nocturnal, they are going to be acting a bit different usually during the day than at night. At night, they're more in a hunting mode, they're more alert. Daytime, they're a little bit more placid, but that doesn't mean that a really angry Boiga at night is going to be a calm and tame snake in the daytime. But I have noticed just overall, there is a difference between how they behave from night and day. So in the wild, their diet consists of birds, eggs, amphibians, lizards, snakes, and each other. Now, one thing that's actually kind of unique among Boiga is that Melanota can be quite variable in appearance. The Indonesian Dendrophila usually just full complete rings, and that's kind of all you get normally. But with Melanota, incomplete rings, so almost like little yellow licks up the side. Sometimes there's none, sometimes there are dots, sometimes there's complete rings, but they're spaced further apart. So a lot of variability. A lot of the really weird looking animals are going to be Melanota. So captive care and acclimation. Now these snakes obviously are nocturnal, so I prefer to offer food in the evening time before lights out. And the cool thing about Melanota is I have found them to be very unpicky animals when it comes to feeding. Mostly with Dendrophila from like Indonesia, they can be very problematic feeders, preferring lizards and frogs and that sort of thing. Melanota seem to have no issues with rodents whatsoever. So for first meals, I usually will offer live rat pups. That works most of the time. For those that don't take those, I will then go to frozen thawed chicks or quail. And then of course from there, if I have like finicky feeders, I will go to lizard scenting, frog scenting, frog legs, actual lizards, whatever it takes to get those guys going. But live rat pups are my go-to. Seems to work most of the time. So being that this is an arboreal snake, you want to make sure that your cage is set up for an arboreal animal. Provide branches, some height. Hide boxes can be placed both on the ground as well as off the ground. I also recommend, because most of the time you're going to be doing acclimation with wild-caught animals, keep your handling at a minimum, preferably not at all until those animals acclimate. It just causes unnecessary stress. Now, after about 1 or 2 voluntary feedings, I will then put Flagyl and Panicure into some meals, and I will just do a precautionary parasite treatment. And I do that in the meals so it doesn't cause any stress with tubing meds down an animal's throat. It's too stressful in my opinion, and I like to get animals feeding first as a priority, and then from there I can just introduce the meds via food. Now, mite treatment, I don't even know if I need to address that. You should be treating every single animal for mites, regardless where it comes from, before it enters your collection. Mite eradication is super important, so I usually don't even mention that, but we do that immediately upon arrival so we don't have to worry about it later. Now, usually for Melanota, I'm feeding them on a 1-week feeding regimen. However, if I see an animal that needs a little bit extra food, I may shorten the duration in between meals. I may make it like feeding every 5 or 6 days. The animals have a pretty fast metabolism and seem like they can handle it very well. And again, I only do that for animals that need a little bit extra meat on their bones. Now, for temperature, I usually try to provide a warm spot of 86 to 87 degrees, and the other areas of the cage are going to be a much cooler ambient, and I just let the animals choose where they want to be, what temperature they want to be at, and that's about it. It's pretty basic. Breeding mangrove snakes, pretty simple ordeal if you have healthy, thriving adults. Most Boiga will reproduce readily in captivity, but it's very important that your animals are ready to do so. Now, palpating for follicles, that is, again, going back to my previous Masterclass videos, I speak about it a lot, and it is a huge part of how I do my breeding programs. I only pair mangroves when I feel females with follicles. It reduces the chances that an animal is going to get eaten when I do the introduction, because that is always a possibility with Boiga. So feel for follicles. Once they're present, pair my animals. Usually they're in breeding mode. Everything goes according to plan. Now, they will lay 4 to 12 eggs per clutch, and I tend to incubate my eggs about 81 or 82 degrees, and it usually takes roughly about 90 days for those eggs to hatch. So Melanota eggs are actually quite thick. So the way that I do it is I will wait for the first one to pip, and then I will manually pip the remaining eggs. It kind of just ensures a better hatch rate in case any of those little snakes get exhausted and aren't able to leave their eggs. Now, you may see people on other YouTube channels actually pulling baby snakes out of eggs. We don't do that with Boiga. It is ill-advised. Those animals, once they pip, they start breathing air, and then they're going to be sitting in their eggs and absorbing the yolk sac. It could be a day, it could be 2 or 3 days, but when they are ready, they will leave the eggs on their own. They do not need any human intervention in doing this. I don't know if this needs to be said, but the very best performing incubators are the ones that have almost no fluctuation. I use a converted cooler. I've been using it for like 20 years. Flex watt, controlled by a good thermostat. That incubator fluctuates only about 1/10 of a degree. It performs quite well. There's many different options on how you can go about incubating eggs, but with Melanota, they are prone to kinking, so you want to make sure your temperatures don't fluctuate that much. And I always advise incubating at lower temperatures. It should reduce the possibility of any kinking in those developing babies. So establishing babies, they are basically just like the adults. They usually are not very finicky and they will self-start on rodents. I usually use live day-old pinkies to start with. If I have any finicky eaters, I will then move to scenting. And if the scenting is not working, I then will go to the same methods of assist feeding that I showed in my Cyanea video. So my final thoughts on Melanota. You know, I've been working with these for about 20 years now. In fact, I can remember bringing captive bred babies that I produced to expos, and then I would just bring them home at the end of the show because nobody would buy them. I think part of this was because people were afraid of mangrove snakes in general. The Indonesian wild-caught ones did horribly, and I think people just kind of looked and figured that the babies would be the exact same, but they weren't. And as the market started to change, I wanted to work with a lot of other different species, and I had the opportunity to set up breeding animals in Malaysia, and I was importing from my partner in Malaysia a few times per year. So it just worked out better that we could breed those animals in Malaysia, and I could just have those captive bred babies coming to me in my shipments. And then it opened up cage space and allowed me to work with different species. We've pretty much stuck to that idea this entire time. We still have animals in Malaysia that are breeding. In fact, we actually have eggs incubating right now at this moment for our June shipment. So it seems to be working out quite well, especially with me living over here and kind of just having him and his employees do exactly what they've been doing for quite a long time. So that is about it, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I hope you guys are enjoying the Masterclass videos. We are not done yet. We will see you in the next one. Take care.